Hey boys and girls. Alright, so this week the video that I wanted to cover was kind of an extension of a previous video where we talked about values. And so we talked about shading and basically using values which are almost like tones or tints or shades of a color or in this case different shades of gray. And you have almost black, you know, the darkest that you can take your tool, which is either pencil or graphite or charcoal being darker than the graphite usually, all the way to pretty much the white of the paper. So we're going to not go into values again, but I did want to kind of cover another project just utilizing values. So I touched on, you know, taking values and creating a sphere or creating an apple, and then using that to then create more complex shapes, like a person's face or like a skull or what have you. And then from there, once we cover this, I'd like to go into texture, where you're still using values, but you're then starting to create, you know, either a shiny surface or a really rough surface, and we'll get into that later. So really quick, I just wanted to introduce some of these tools, and I'll just show you the quick process. Not so quick. I'll fast forward through it, but the process of, you know, using charcoal versus graphite, which is kind of the same, except here with the charcoal you can get a lot darker on your values, and versus the pencil graphite you can get to a pretty, you know, a dark gray, but you won't get as close to black as you can with charcoal when you're working with dry media, I guess. So you can pick up any of these kits, you know, at a typical art store, but you know, you have like your white charcoal pencil, and these really work great when you're working with like toned paper. So if you're working with paper that's already toned a certain color, like a beige or something like that, then these work great. I don't usually have too much success when I'm already working on white paper. What I do is I just use my eraser and just try to avoid covering up what I really want to be almost a bright highlight. I try not to cover it too much and kind of ruin that highlight area. And then you have so you have these charcoal pencils, right? And the great thing is with this, you can also get them to where they come at different levels. So kind of like pencils, if you ever use drawing pencils or art pencils, see, like this one says 2B, right? This one, where are you at? That one's a B. And then this one's an HB. Okay, so an HB is usually like it's right in between. That's like your typical school pencil, number 2 pencil. So there's different levels. When you start going, when you're in the H's, that's where the lead, I guess you could say, is a little bit harder. Doesn't smudge so easy. That's a little bit more compressed, a little bit harder. And then you have your HB, 2B, 4B, 6B, 8B. And here I have my tiny charcoal 6B, and you can tell I like using this one a lot to get my dark values. And this one means 6B means it's softer. It's a lot easier to kind of smudge. It comes out softer. It's a little bit more brittle. With that said, whether it's charcoal pencils, color pencils, regular drawing pencils, this one's an HB, really try hard not to drop these on the floor, because then this gets broken inside, and then when you go to sharpen it, you sharpen it, the tip will just slide right off. Why? Because it's already broken inside, because we keep dropping them. So that's what I always tell my students: be careful, don't drop these all over the place, don't be throwing them around, because you don't realize that you're breaking them on the inside, and then you're going to be frustrated when you go to sharpen it and the darn lead keeps sliding out. Yeah. All right, other than that, right, typical eraser, really good eraser, and then a kneaded eraser. So this eraser you can kind of knead around in your hands to kind of clean it up. And this one's great for if you want to kind of dab at an area, like let's say you darkened an area and you didn't want to be so dark, you can just kind of dab at it and it'll lift that value and be a little bit lighter. Okay, and then you know, of course, handy dandy tortillon, or a smudge stick, what I like to call. And then of course you can also have charcoal sticks, and these are great where, you know, if you're working with a charcoal pencil, right, you can sharpen this and get into some nice fine detail, you know, into the tighter spots. But this one you can use for the big areas. So I can then turn it on its side, all right, and I can just very quickly kind of create some really nice edges with that, right? Really nice edges, and you can just really apply some very quick charcoal, and then have a handy dandy towel, you know, something nice and soft preferably, and then you can soften that up, kind of blend it in. The more cottony the better. This one's kind of rough, not the best one, but this is what I had handy in my classroom at the time, and I'm such a caveman that I make do with anything to make it work. So but something, you know, soft. You can use any of these kind of shop towels. Sometimes we'll do an old sock, right? Even Kleenex, but the Kleenex get kind of torn up. So anywho, that's what we're going to be using in this little tutorial. And yeah, so that's really how we apply the charcoal, right? Nice and soft. And then of course, if you needed to, you can then come in and do your detail work with your charcoal pencil. I'm not really drawing anything. This is just non-representational abstract. I'm just trying to show you how this goes down, but you can see how dark that is. Really nice and dark, just almost jet black. And you can then of course fade it into these much lighter values. And then again, as I mentioned last time, now that this thing's kind of dirty, right, if I use it to kind of smudge and blend an area, this thing's dirty, I can then use this to apply some really light values somewhere else where I might need this light gray without having to then apply it with the charcoal. Because of course when you apply with the charcoal, it comes out really dark, and it might be too dark, right? Too dark, and you didn't want it that way. And of course you can have your eraser. Since this is applied nice and soft, I can go in and easily kind of take this off if I want to then regain some highlight areas. Or again, I can kind of dab at it with my kneaded eraser. Kneaded eraser, I haven't come across one that's really good in a long time. I don't use them too much anymore just because I found that the quality, I don't know if it's slipped, but or maybe I'm just not finding good ones, but I don't use these too much anymore. I kind of just forego them and make it work without them. But yeah, that's the purpose, is to where you can kind of, almost like a sponge, you suck up some of the value that you put down, where you want to be kind of gentle with it and not necessarily erase it and start again. You're just kind of lifting it and softening it. All right, so we'll get into the video. We're just using values, white to medium gray to black and everything in between. And we're going to be using a blended rendered look and a squiggly look as well. All right, so as you can see, working on a portrait here of myself, and it's actually going to be two portraits in one. So with this one, we were working on a double exposure. I think I had assigned this to some of my advanced drawing kids, where we were doing a double exposure where you have two images that ghost into each other. They kind of overlap, and so you kind of see both kind of fading into each other at the same time. And so on the first one, I wanted them to get the feel for blending and rendering with the charcoal, and then we were going to use the squiggly drawing method on the second one once we get into that one. So what I like to do a lot of times when I'm working with the charcoal, especially if I'm doing something like skin, where it's, you know, you have to be real subtle with your values, you know, in terms of grayscale, is I will use my pencil or my charcoal stick and I'll darken, of course, the darkest areas, the shadow areas. And then what I'll do is that I'll then kind of use the tortillon, I'll dirty up the tortillon and I'll drag some of that dark value into my lighter areas where I need some of these lighter values to kind of kick in. So instead of maybe trying to drop in a new set of layers with the charcoal pencil, I'll just use the dirty tortillon or smudge stick and I will then create some lighter values that way. So you can see that I use that a lot, like on the skin tones of the where it fades into the light. So you have your highlights fading into your midtones. And so I'll use the dirty tortillon there. As you work on the teeth, tip of the day is with teeth, try not to create really dark outlines of each tooth. Really try to keep it light. Very light shadows around the teeth. Just so they don't look like bricks in your mouth or chiclets, gums, for any of you who know what that is. So yeah, keep it light when you're shading in your teeth. You know what? Second tip of the day, highlights in the eyes for sure. Always remember to put highlights and shadows in the eyes. It helps them come alive. Otherwise, they just look flat and kind of dead. So make sure you always put some highlights in there because the eyes do carry a lot of moisture. In the eyelids, you know, inside the sclera, which is the white part of the eye, and near your tear duct, and then of course across a nice highlight across like your pupil or iris, which is the colored part of your eye. So here I'm kind of finishing up, and so I slowly start to fade it down into the second portrait. And so I want the values to be there, but not as dark or overpowering, because I do want that to kind of blend in and merge with the second portrait, which is actually going to be done with a 6B drawing pencil, only because the charcoal pencils are kind of thick, and I wanted the lines to be a little, you know, a little thinner to where they weren't, you could see some gaps between each mark, right? And so here I flip the page, and so I'm starting to work on my squiggly technique, and again looking at the reference, comparing, and again the closer you put your marks, it's kind of like cross hatching and hatching, the more shadow that you are implying. And so this one is this one's fun to do because you're just squiggling, creating figure eights and just random shapes and just trying to create these values. So I work on my dark values first and slowly kind of once I get the dark values, it pretty much lets me see the image, and then I focus on then working on the midtones and slowly into the highlights, and that's where I space out my lines, I space out my marks, and or I try not to put as much pressure on the pencil or the charcoal, whatever you're using. So that's pretty much the gist of it. Hopefully this gives you guys maybe some insight into using charcoal or helps you out. If this was helpful, please let me know in the comments. If you actually give this a try, show me the images, post them on there. You can email them to me, that'd be great. But let me know if this helps, or if there's anything else you'd like for me to cover in the next video. I believe in the next one we'll get into textures and how to create textures again using values, and then we'll just keep moving forward from there. So I'll let this one kind of trail off, and you can continue to watch the process, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.
If you want more videos like this,
smash that like button and subscribe.